Hey everybody, Mark from the Geek Church here, and we made it to our episode 2. Alright, I'm gonna put in like a title drop there. As you can see, this is one of those top 10 list kind of things. If you don't like top 10 lists, skip to the end. Better yet, keep on watching and just like and subscribe, because honestly I kind of like that. Anyway, this time I'm going to be talking about my favorite movies, my favorite TV shows, and my favorite comic books. And I'm going to do it in a sort of a top 20 format with the 10, you'll kind of see what I mean. Movies. When it comes to movies, I've always loved them. There's just something about just that self-contained story, and there's just something about just getting all these people together and doing some stuff. Yeah, there's just something about movies altogether. It's always kind of been magical for me. So, hey. So let's just get to the list, shall we? Number 20, Saving Private Ryan. I've seen this one the least simply because it's the hardest to watch, but it's a film that just everybody needs to see just to know about the brutality of war. Number 19, Mad Max Fury Road. Not every film looks like this, and I'm kind of glad that it doesn't. It's a unique action film, and it's great. Number 18, Pulp Fiction. Very pretentious dialogue, multiple storylines, weird chronology, and I love it. Inspired a lot of filmmakers, maybe even me. Number 17, Ghostbusters. Just a funny film from start to finish and a very unique concept, very original at the time. Dan Aykroyd, who also wrote The Blues Brothers, which didn't make this list, is a genius. Number 16, Fight Club. It's dark and it's an excellent reflection of our society, and that's why it is a masterpiece. Number 15, Memento. It is a brilliant film with a great concept, and it has absolutely no sense of closure, and it obviously kickstarted Christopher Nolan's film career. It's great. Number 14, The Prince of Egypt. It's big, it's animated, it's biblical. It is pretty much everything that you go to the movies for, plus a great human story about two brothers. Number 13, Who Framed Roger Rabbit? This film takes the concept of humans and toons living together about as far as you can imagine in a great film noir setting, and I just love it all the time. Number 12, Minority Report. The concept of a detective that can predict murders and then solve them before they happen is great, but when that detective is the next murderer, that's when things get really interesting. Watch this if you haven't. Number 11, Aliens. James Cameron's follow-up to the original film is really great, about a woman who's dealing with PTSD in a nightmare scenario with lots of nightmare aliens. Number 10, Die Hard. This is about a man who goes to LA to try and make up with his wife, and terrorists show up and take this 40-story building hostage, and then he has to fight them off. And there is so much great action here that it set the bar high for a lot of explosions and gunfights in films. And one of my favorite scenes is when John McClane jumps off this building with a fire hose attached to him, and that scene just builds and builds so perfectly. And Bruce Willis also plays this role with such, he just kind of has this frustrated sarcasm to him that I believe I would probably have if given this scenario, or I would like to think I would have in this scenario. It's fun, and I just keep going back to it. Number 9. Spider-Man 2. Now, Peter has to face greater power and greater responsibility as he faces with Dr. Otto Octavius, who has these giant metal octopus arms ready to get him, but also he's dealing with the fact that he doesn't know whether he wants to be Spider-Man, and at some point in time he quits. And honestly, this is a movie where it has two plots, but they both work pretty well together. And there's a scene that accumulates on a train that I just think is one of the best action scenes of all time. And it just kind of shows who Spider-Man really is. I really enjoyed this film, and it's not the only Spider-Man film to make this list. Number 8. Speed Racer. Yes, I'm well aware this is probably on a lot of people's top 10 worst films. But honestly, I love this film, and I keep watching it. And part of it is maybe because as a kid I grew up watching the cartoon, but the movie is only slightly like the cartoon as it uses the same characters. But I love all the car race action in this film, and also this film has a great message about just doing what you believe, and Speed has a great family that's there to support him, even though they don't necessarily support exactly what he does. but this is a really solid, good film that I think the reason why it didn't do so well is because a certain film called Iron Man came out the same week as this film, or around the same time as this film. You'll notice no MCU films have made this list. Sorry. Number 7. Back to the Future. This is going to be one of those in which I count like the actual film series as just a film. Of course, I think maybe the greatest of this is the first one. I like this film because not only is it fun and it's funny, but it is also very smart. It expects the audience to pick up on certain details in it that will pay off later in the film. And I think that this film really made the way, I think the smartly written way it was written allowed other films to be made that were very much like it. It definitely established kind of a time travel as a genre. And there's just so much nostalgia in it. I'm kind of glad Universal has essentially let this franchise rest. And I don't want to reboot. I don't want anything done with this. Just leave it alone. Number 6. Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Or just Raiders of the Lost Ark. But yeah, I don't really count all Indiana Jones films on this one because 2 and 4 and probably maybe even 5, I don't even think are worth mentioning. Last Crusade is great. Raiders of the Lost Ark is good because of just the way it is shot. It is so beautiful in the way just there's a certain scene where Indy is just looking and there's just light that shines on his eyes, and there's just it is just masterful by Steven Spielberg and Lucas. And it is an adventure film just really like no other, and its action is just constantly going and going and going, and it really set this bar high for action films after it. And it's just a great film, and it's a great character, and yeah. Number 5. Toy Story. Now I only count the first of these movies in this one, but it kickstarted a whole new type of film, the computer-generated animated film. And it was a huge risk probably back at the time, and I'm sure they wondered whether they could even do a film like this. Of course, having Tom Hanks and Tim Allen with the voice helped, but not only is it imaginative, but the story is actually rather believable. I like the idea that even though this world is kind of artificial and plastic looking, and the toys themselves are that way, there's something that's very believable about the story, and as well as like this kind of world within a world that takes place while we're not looking. I like that, and I really enjoyed this film when it first came out, and it's a really good memory when I first saw it, so I'll get put on the list. Number 4. Lord of the Rings. Yeah, I'm counting all 3 films on this one. I've read the books, and they aren't on my book list. I'll have to have that out sometime. Peter Jackson was just able to bring this trilogy to life in just an amazing way. I can't even pick a favorite of these 3 movies. And I find myself sympathizing not only with the characters so much, but just the world itself is just one you just want to live in and you can relate with. And there's so many things going on in this film, but at the same time, it never feels too crowded. It always feels like the eye goes to, even the scenes with massive armies, I feel like the eye goes to the place where it should go to, and it never feels overwhelming or confusing, but it feels downright spectacular and classic. Number 3. The Matrix. If you don't know what this film is about, I am not going to try and ruin it with any type of short synopsis. I really can't stand the sequels, particularly that new one that they just came out with, the 4th one. But it works as this action film / sci-fi film / martial arts film / dystopian film. There's just so many things mixed into this story that really make it work. And I think that's just the thing. You really get sucked into this thing. And the style, unfortunately, which was imitated several times after this, was really all its own and has been done to death. But it is just as alone, I still watch this film and I still enjoy everything about it, and it's very awesome. Number 2. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Now, I'm almost insulted at how good this film is. When the trailers came out, I despised the animation style as well as scenes with dialogue that felt like they were out of a straight-to-DVD sort of animated film. But what I got was a story that just blew me away with not only its visuals, but the actual story itself of Miles Morales can be very heartbreaking, but it also can be very relatable as well. And it teaches you, like as Spider-Man, not to give up, to keep trying, and I really think I just love this film because it has that kind of feel to it, and it's great. See it if you haven't. Number 1. Star Wars. Yeah. I just think this film has influenced me more than anything. And when I say this film, I guess I'm talking about the original trilogy. I guess if I had to pick a favorite, it would be Empire, but a lot of people pick that one. I also actually am partial to Jedi. But there was something about this film that just made me want to buy all the toys and write stories like this. It was just something about this world that just was, that you could not only live in, but you could tell so many stories out of it. And nowadays, we have told so many stories out of it, and I don't think we'll ever milk this idea of Star Wars dry. But it certainly has created a lot of other sci-fi universes that, honestly, I mean, they're comparable, but Star Wars is kind of its own, and a lot of these other sci-fi movies are also good in their own right. And it definitely opened the doors to as far as like what people could do in film, as far as what people could see. Yes, its influence can never be underestimated. Its world and this franchise will just simply never end. Okay, time to turn our attention to television shows. I mean, television shows were something that, I mean, we all grew up with. I mean, we all would tune in to certain, I mean, we're past the point where we do this, where we tune in every week to watch a new episode, or every day, or every whatever. Nowadays it's all streamed, but we still have to find a time to tune in, and now we just do it on our own time. I'm not saying that that's a good or bad thing, but I'm saying like, hey, it's just the landscape we're at right now. And some television shows now these days are pretty high budget and very big and have great acting in them, and writing. So I can't argue with that. So let's just get to the list, shall we? Number 20, This Is Us, story of a couple with their 3 grown-up kids with a chronology all over the place. It is a great thing to follow all 6 seasons just so you can see all of it. Number 19, Community. When this show was funny, it was hysterical. It had a lot of misses, but when it hits it, it knocked it out of the park. Number 18, Regular Show. When I started watching this show, I could not stop laughing. Number 17, BoJack Horseman. Somehow this show that appeared to be this farcical adult animated comedy became one of the most dramatic shows on television. Number 16, South Park. I just recently got into this one, and I find the satire of this show outweighs its gross humor. Check it out if you haven't. It's fun. Number 15, Mr. Robot. This is a very unique show about a hacker who has mental issues, and the world is crumbling around him. Check this out if you haven't seen it. Not a lot of people talk about this show anymore. Number 14, Samurai Jack. Minimalist animation, very little dialogue, but lots of action, and unlike anything you've ever seen before. Number 13, Seinfeld. It appears that a lot of shows follow this multi-plotline comedy model, but it is still pretty funny as heck if you haven't watched it in a while. Check it out. Number 12, Battlestar Galactica, the modern one. The story is very epic in its scale and very huge, about the last of humanity trying to stop the robot creations that are coming after them. Great show. Number 11, Erased. This is an anime that hasn't really gone mainstream, but it's the story of a guy who has to time travel back to his past to prevent a tragedy from happening. It's very good. Number 10, The Simpsons. Yes, it's pretty clear that animation and television, a lot has been influenced by this show that began pretty much when I was in high school and is still on. And a lot of its episodes are pure comedy gold, particularly the early ones, and even some of the modern day ones are still very good. You get a good gem every once in a while. Yeah, it's not as good as it once was, but every situation comedy is just going to exhaust itself sooner or later. The Simpsons might not feel like every family, but the town of Springfield just really feels like all of us. There's something about this thing that just really feels like this is your typical American town, and it's oftentimes very good satire, and it's just really it keeps me watching all the time. The animation has gotten better over the years, but even the stuff that looked bad back then was still just good as far as having a heart, and it certainly is biting in its satire, but I don't feel like it's cynical about Number 9. Star Trek The Next Generation. I was amazed at the show back in the 80s because at the time I was reading a lot of science fiction. And I was amazed that they were able to take very big sci-fi concepts and put them on a little screen. It wasn't really trying to be that original series with Kirk and Spock. It was really trying to be its own thing, and it really succeeded at that. And most people say that it's better than the original series because even though the original series is classic, they created something that was just very decent. And I kind of think like I think it's really a standard that we measure every Star Trek show after that. And they keep making these. And they just finished up Picard and stuff like that. But it's pretty clear this series will always be with us in one way or the other. But I think we'll always remember back to this particular one. Number 8. Lost. Yes. A passenger plane crash lands on a mysterious island, one of the most expensive pilots ever made. And from there, the focus is on each passenger and their past, present, and future, and all of this is set practically always around a character. And not only that, the island itself is really kind of a character in this thing, and there's always something going on. And this is a show that makes you constantly guessing. It was a show that was really like one of those internet around the water cooler type thing back when that was just getting started. And I actually recently rewatched this show because I thought the latter seasons were pretty weak and I thought it had a weak payoff, but honestly it actually I might do a whole episode about this because this show actually does have a really good wrap up, and not only that, I think it does have a decent theme that runs throughout the whole thing. So yeah, check it out if you haven't. It's 6 seasons and it's quite a journey. Number 7. Gravity Falls. Mabel and Dipper are these 2 young kids. They're twins and they spend the summer with their great uncle Stan, who has this fakey museum known as the Mystery Shack, and then in this town called Gravity Falls. The 2 twins then discover actual supernatural phenomena and they start to investigate this. And this is one of those series that has a giant overarching story around it. And by the time you get to the large story, it has a huge payoff in its finale that is one of the best finales I think I've ever seen, and I've watched it over and over and over. And best of all, the show didn't last very long. It was only like 2 seasons, which is a good enough time to build up the saga element of this thing, but not enough time for it to wear out its welcome. I kind of wish a lot of shows would kind of do this, make something very original and engaging, and then just simply let it go. As far as I know, I don't think there's any plans to revive this show. I'm kind of hoping there is room for a storyline, and maybe I would be willing to watch it, but if this is the only offering of this that I get, I would be very glad. Number 6. Parks and Recreation. This is a show that I watched the first episode and quit immediately, thinking it was a derivative of another show, The Office. Then when I noticed that it was on for quite a while after that, I realized why it was still on. The show had an awkward start, but eventually they made some changes. And the one thing I like about this show is the character Leslie Knope got developed to this very positive influence of change in her small town. And not only did she change her town, but she helped change the world as well. And I really love this aspect of this. This is a great ensemble cast of characters who just worked off each other, and some of them are very memorable, such as Ron Swanson or Tom Halford, are just great in what they did on this show. And the final episode is just a great. It's very good as far as like wrapping everything up, and its whole last season actually wrapped up a lot of plot elements, and it was very well done. Number 5. Futurama. Unlike The Simpsons, the world of Futurama is very vast, and I'm told that they are reviving this again. And there's a lot that can happen on this episode, even within the handful of characters, or main characters, that establish this very out-of-this-world. And this show is not only very funny, but it's also very satirical. It knows what it's trying to do. And there are several episodes that end with an extremely heartfelt ending that were some of their best in the series. And I've already done like a top 20 on this show, so you can check that out if you haven't. Number 4. Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Yeah, this is a show that I had a hard time watching its first season. I was about ready to quit on it, but somewhere in its second season, there's something about this show with its establishing characters and the fact that they continue to fight against these forces of darkness that plague their small town. Something about this just really works. There is something about this that these guys are willing to fight even though they are easily outmatched, that I just like the tight-knit friendship that is around these characters, as well as a lot of just things that just shouldn't have worked, like when the main character goes to college. Normally that's when the show fails. In this case, the show got really good when that happens. And there are some episodes of this that I consider like some of the finest episodes of television written. And the finale, I absolutely love. It is incredibly spectacular. Number 3. The Office. Now, there's something very real about this show, and part of that is its mockumentary format, and that's been a format of many comedies since then. This is one of those shows where it's like a lot of people imitate the style of it afterwards, but can't quite get it right. Parks and Recreation would have been one of them if it hadn't begun to do its own thing. But The Office was good because the characters felt like people that you actually would work with. And I basically, in every office setting I have, I can always compare them to one of those characters on The Office. And I can compare myself with some of those characters on The Office. Can you tell which one? Anyway, it's great to see them work together, even though that they might despise the fact they all work at this place of Dunder Mifflin. They all still do their best job. Even Michael Scott, a boss who could have easily been this evil boss type dictator persona, but eventually became kind of the opposite of that. He was the boss that always thinks he's your friend and always wants to be liked. And I really enjoyed the fact that they went from this angle. It was incredibly unique how they did this. You know, I've never seen the original British version, but yeah, I thought this one was pretty decent. Number 2. Babylon 5. Most people have not watched this show, and it never seemed to mainstream, even though it is probably one of the most planned out shows I've ever seen as far as just this epic in scale story. It has about 5 seasons. It takes place on this orbital space station that's kind of a united nation for aliens, I guess, in this world. And you get to know certain unique characters in season 1, and then by the time you get to season 2, there's a bigger overarching conflict that is beginning to take place. And by the time the action starts to accumulate in season 4, it gets massive in its scale. And you just are really following how great and awesome this story is. There really isn't anything like it, and I have to say, in season 5, they actually they wanted to do 5 seasons, but they thought that they were only going to get 4, and then at the last minute they were greenlit to get a season 5. And so season 5 feels very much tacked on, but if you catch its finale, it is such a great finale that just wraps up the story pretty well. And I'm told that this is going to get a reboot, an animated version or something like that. I'm not sure how well I want this to be left alone, but we'll always have the first 5 seasons, and even though the effects look pretty dated, honestly, I'll give it that. It is a show that I think everybody should watch because it is so well written and it is so well done. Number 1. Avatar: The Last Airbender. If I had it my way, every show would be like this. As far as its world building goes, as far as its imagination goes, as far as its epic scale goes, as far as its characters go, it knocks it out of the park in all fields. And there's just something about seeing these kids who are trying to change the world and then succeed in doing it is just very fantastic. And yeah, it had a follow-up series that I'm not really a fan of. And of course, no one really wants to talk about the M. Night Shyamalan movie that was live action that did not need to be made. I mean, I'll say I'll say that much. But hey, there's something to this story that I believe was very well done, and it would be very hard to capture this lightning in a bottle twice. But I really want most shows to, especially fantasy shows, to really have this type of plan as far as where characters go, where plot goes, and I really think that's very vital to any particular television show. And this show really just came out of nowhere and just did so fantastic at it. Okay, for the last list I want to talk about is comics. I grew up reading certain comics, and still when I can, I try and read comics when I can, but I just don't want to donate any sense of percentage of my salary to purchase them anymore. I'm just not really that type of guy anymore. There were some stories that just really just inspired me, and I have to admit influenced my work, and I'm going to list those out here right now. Number 20, Top 10. No, that's actually the name of the comic, and it's about a city where everyone is some sort of superhero or robot or something unusual, written by Master Alan Moore. It's great. Number 19, Crisis on Infinite Earths. Marv Wolfman and George Perez teamed up to make this huge epic scale DC comic where I swear there's like 100 characters in every panel. It's big, it's grandiose, check it out. Number 18, Wonder Woman. When George Perez finished Crisis on Infinite Earths, he revised one of DC's most classic characters, getting into Diana's mythical roots, and it's a great read. Number 17, New Mutants. This was a Chris Claremont and Bill Sienkiewicz run. The book got very dark and very mature, and the look didn't really last long, but there's some great stories in it, and it inspired the movie that really wasn't so good. Number 16, Strikeforce Morituri. This was a book where an alien war happened and humans could get superpowers to stop this. However, the price is you would be dead within a year. It's a great concept, and I don't know if they ever really caught on. Number 15, Machine Man. This was a comic that took place in the year 2020, and it actually made 2020, the real one, look pretty tame by comparison. But it had great art by Barry Windsor Smith, and I highly recommend it because it was cyberpunk before there was cyberpunk. Number 14, Kingdom Come. This was a DC project that took place in the future where all the superheroes had grown old and their kids weren't so good. It's epic in its scale, and the artwork by, I can't remember the name, is photorealistic. Just check it out. Number 13, Power Pack. This was a series about these 4 kids who all inherit superpowers, and the first 5 issues are great, and issues, I think, 21 to 25 are also great and epic in their scale, and absolutely magical and fantastic. Check it out. Number 12, Batman The Dark Knight Rises. This is a pretty famous one. Story takes place in the future where Batman has to come out of retirement to stop a new wave of crime in a very dark Gotham City. Frank Miller did this series and pretty much rebooted The Dark Knight to this gritty thing that we still have today. Number 11, Wanted. This is nothing like its movie, but a story of a man who discovers that he is in the long line of supervillains, and its ending is very mean-spirited, but also very perfect. This is a very interesting story about selfishness and villainy. Number 10, Marvel's Star Wars 100. Now, after Return of the Jedi, Star Wars only really survived for a while on Marvel Comics. And the series wasn't doing very well. I take it to avoid cancellation. I think they were trying to introduce this new foe called the Nagai. This didn't really work though, because they ended on issue 107. But in issue 100, the Nagai have this huge first strike kind of thing, and the battles get really epic, as well as there's also been battles on land that remind me of the actual movies themselves. It felt like just a successor to what Lucas had left behind in the original trilogy. It's too bad that it never really took off, but I always remember this story as fondly as I remember the Star Wars trilogy. Number 9, Thor Croaks. Okay, this isn't really... It was the title of one issue where Thor becomes a frog, but honestly, this is really the accumulation of work by an artist named Walt Simonson, who took over Thor in issue, I think, 337, introduced a character named Beta Ray Bill, and the stories just got very epic and mythical, drawing from all the Norse legends of the time, that it was really great best-selling and just great artwork on this here. In this particular storyline, though, which actually made me want to buy the entire series, was Loki turns Thor into a frog because, well, at the time Odin had been dead and Thor was up to the next in line as far as ruling, but Loki wanted him out of the way. And so from there, Thor gets involved Thor as a frog gets involved in this kind of war between the frogs and the rats, which is this plotline that just kind of is really sidelined, but is almost more interesting than the main plot. Or at least I thought it was. And then of course when he picks up the hammer, he becomes the Frog Thor, and oh my gosh. Anyway, this just sucks you into the world of Thor, and I think Walt Simonson left the book shortly after this story.
Number 8.
X Factor: Fall of the Mutants. Now, in this series of X Factor was essentially after they revived Jean Grey from the dead, the original 5, Cyclops, Jean Grey, Beast, Angel, and Iceman, decided to kind of get together, and they started this covert group where they pretended to be mutant hunters, and somebody could call, and if they reported a mutant, then they would come dressed as these mutant hunters, and then they would take the mutant away and then help him. And it was just a weird concept that just didn't really last overall. And it lasted about 2 years. That's when they met Apocalypse, who is one of the X-Men's greatest foes now, who's just this huge force of nature, and he attacks New York City in this city-sized spaceship, and the battle just gets so epic. And at that time, Angel, who had been dead at the time because comics, is revived in this powered form with these metallic wings, and it's just so there's so much awesomeness just packed in these issues, and I always remember pretty fondly.
Number 7.
Okay, Marvel graphic novel, The Sensational She-Hulk. Now, before that term, graphic novel was used to describe pretty much all comics. Marvel used to refer to it to these comics that were about the size of a magazine, and they had better paper than most comics. Now, John Byrne, who had been writing for the Fantastic Four, he got the thing out of the group for a little while, and then he put She-Hulk in his place. And She-Hulk was sort of a female character who had a lot of personality, which was not common for a lot of female characters in comics back then. And so in this solo one-shot She-Hulk story, She-Hulk is taken away by S.H.I.E.L.D., and then there's just a lot of action in that helicarrier thing that you've probably seen in the Avengers movies. And it's explosive, action-packed. She-Hulk has a lot of great one-liners in it. And it's a really good story that I used to read almost every weekend, honestly. It was that good.
Number 6.
Okay, New Teen Titans, specifically a run that took place in 1984. I think I might have mentioned George Perez before and Marv Wolfman, but they created a version of the Teen Titans that still resonates today, even on Teen Titans Go. This group was definitely dealing with more mature issues, and in just 1 year they had 2 stories that just knocked out of the park. Now, the first was a story called The Judas Contract, which is a story of how one of their own, Terra, was a deliberate traitor planted within the group by Deathstroke, who at the time was called the Terminator. And that story is just very well done, I thought. And in that same year, the New Teen Titans got this spin-off book, which kind of, I don't even want to try to explain it, but it was like a direct sales book where they ended the first series and we were going to do that. It gets really complicated. I don't want to do this. Anyway, but in this one story where Raven, one of the members of the group, gets completely consumed by the power of her father. I think it's pronounced Trigon. I pronounced it Trigon as a kid, but hey. And then from the story becomes this epic horror type thing as the world gets totally encased in rock and stone, and there's bodies everywhere. And it's just out of the world creativity that these two did in the space of a year that I have to admit, it still takes my breath away sometimes.
Number 5.
The Dark Phoenix Saga. Yeah, you probably knew this was probably going to make the list because, I mean, I don't really know. I think I've already mentioned the Teen Titans, but the X-Men probably did this idea of creating a character who gets way too overpowered, in this case Jean Grey, when she becomes Phoenix. And then essentially the X-Men go through a lot of adventures, and it's a very soap opera-y. The stories very much interconnect. And I mean, they meet a lot of villains like Magneto, and then I think the X-Men starts to think that one of their teams is dead. I don't want to get too much into complicating that. They met the powerful Proteus, and then they meet the Hellfire Club, this villainous group, this secret society that wants to take over the world. And this is sort of the fight here is a big trigger that causes Jean Grey to essentially go nuts and become Phoenix, and eventually destroying this nearby star and a planet that has all these aliens on it. And the alien race actually bring her to trial for this, and then the ending battle ends just very sadly. And hey, anyway, it's such a decent story that is just tragic, showing how power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and it's wonderful comics reading.
Number 4.
Okay, I think this is pronounced Mouse or something like that. I've heard recently that this comic has come to attention because people want to censor that, and this is a shame to censor this story. I can understand why, because it is not a pretty story. It is about Auschwitz, about a man who spends many years in Auschwitz, and how he everything that happened before that, everything that happened during, and everything that happened after. The story is about the author, Art Spiegelman, and trying to relate to his father, who was a Holocaust survivor. And but the story is done in an odd way. For some reason, the Jews are portrayed by mice, and then the Germans are cats. But it's a very serious story that, thank God, hasn't really been adapted to film. I don't think that would really work. But it is a story that I think everyone needs to read because it's just so brilliant in how it is presented, and I'm going to recommend it.
Number 3.
Watchmen. Yeah, you probably knew this was going to make the list. It usually makes a lot of top 10 lists as far as best comics of all time. Many people call this the Citizen Kane of comics, and that, I believe, is an accurate description, even though Citizen Kane isn't on my top movie list. I've read it several times. It takes place in a world where superheroes were not only real, but they actually affected world politics and the world stage. And takes place in an alternate 1985, where Russia and the United States are about to come together for a nuclear war, and unfortunately the only people that can really help them are the heroes that have been outlawed by the government. And then there's a premise of these heroes start getting bumped off or taken care of or taken out of play one by one. And then it turns out the guy who really does it, oh my gosh, there's a great twist ending here, and not only does it twists again, because what you think is going to happen doesn't happen. And this has, of course, had a movie adaptation that is actually pretty good, honestly. And I've heard DC has revived these characters in a plotline that I don't necessarily agree with from what I've heard with. I think this is a story that needed to stand alone, even though it left so much room for a sequel at the end of its original run.
Number 2.
The Asgardian Wars. Now, this is not one comic. This is actually 2 comics, but they're both one shot, so I'm going to just give a little cheat on here. These were standalone stories done by Chris Claremont, who at the time was a writer of the X-Men, and they are knocked out of the park, and they show the limits of imagination that comics can do. Union Special number 1, as well as the X-Men Annual of that year, and I'm blanking as far as what number it was. They take place in Asgard, and they fight Loki. And the way they display Asgard is wonderful due to the artistry of Mr. Art Adams, who is just a very talented artist, and there was so much detail and just beauty in this thing that he created, that they created actually. And it was such a glorifying epic read. And then I think maybe during the same time, Chris Claremont was also working on this story with an artist named Paul Smith on this limited series known as the X-Men Meet Alpha Flight or Versus Alpha Flight. I don't really remember. Loki is also the main character in that. The story itself chronologically takes place before the New Mutants / X-Men team up, but this story, I really loved this X-Men Alpha Flight story. It dealt with Loki essentially creating a paradise in the Arctic and introducing a whole series of normal human characters who get powers and everything like that, but eventually they have to decide whether they have to accept Loki's gift and change the world, but it will cost the world its soul, and it's such a beautiful story that I'm just going to recommend both these two stories.
Number 1.
Alright, and the last is one I still have, Superman the Man of Steel. And I don't know if I'll ever get rid of this, honestly, because this is just really great. At the time, John Byrne was one of my favorite artists and writers because he seemed to be equally talented at both. But he was working for Marvel at the time, and then I believe DC approached him because they wanted to change Superman, because after Crisis on Infinite Earths, which I've already mentioned before, I think the idea of Superman had somehow become very kid-friendly over the years, and they didn't want a darker Superman, but they wanted a revamped Superman. And I get the feeling like John Byrne gave them a Superman that was more human. And I think that's the thing that really works. You see Clark in this thing, and you sense that he's very human. He's not as powerful as a lot of Superman has been. I really like that. But he rewrote the original origin story, and I love his version of Krypton on it. I always felt like there's a lot of things he did right with this revamped origin story. My only regret is that this worked a little too well, because there's been a lot of revamps, and there's been a lot of reboots, and I'm not talking just about Superman, although he has fallen under that umbrella several times. Next week, I'm going to talk about how these things have really altered our creative landscape, and what we can really, and what we need to do as a result of it. Anyway, so I'll end that talking about Man of Steel, and next week I want to talk about how creativity is kind of in a slump with a lot of reboots and sequels and a lot of things that are derivative of something else. And I want to talk about how we can get past this era, and I want to talk about what I want to do to help out. Till then, this is Mark Rollins from the Geek Church, and I'm signing off.